I'm Sam Roberts, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. Popular artificial intelligence apps like ChatGPT are on everyone's minds these days, as large language models, LLMs, are increasingly used to produce the information we consume online. Wikipedia, the widely popular online encyclopedia that relies on human contributors to create and update millions of topical articles in over 300 languages, is attempting to adapt to this world of information automation that threatens to overwhelm Wikipedia's small army of editors and its viability as a global resource of accurate and free information. It's according to our next guest, who wrote a recent article on the topic for the New York Magazine, Wikipedia's Moment of Truth. Joining me now is the very human science author, Jon Gertner. Jon, you point out in your piece that we thought that radio was going to kill print, TV was going to kill radio, the internet was going to kill everything. What about Wikipedia now? Wikipedia, as you point out in that article in the Times, was born in sort of the naive early days of the internet. Now, what about artificial intelligence? Is that going to kill Wikipedia, which was born as a human element, really, by do-good people who volunteered to create this online encyclopedia, an encyclopedia that, as you also point out, sort of killed the print edition of the Britannica?
That's right. I mean, Wikipedia's death has been foretold many times since its founding. It was, thought to be too unreliable to ever make it, and then it was going to be killed by Google search. I mean, why do that? And yet, again and again, it's sort of found a way to adapt. But with chatbots, things are a little bit different. I mean, ChatGPT, for anyone who's used it, you can sort of use it as almost like a Google query. You just start typing and engage in a conversation, and what comes your way is information, some of which, or actually a good amount of which, originally came from Wikipedia. Now, if you have a choice between looking up a involved topic on Wikipedia or going to ChatGPT and having this sort of engaging conversation with an artificial intelligence that sometimes doesn't actually seem that artificial, which is some of the sort of enticing, the most enticing aspect of this new technology, are you going to go to Wikipedia anymore? And that's really this conundrum. Wikipedia has seeded artificial intelligence with this vast corpus of knowledge that's been built up over 2 decades. And now ChatGPT and other chatbots are using that to answer queries that users may want answered. What happens to Wikipedia in that world? And really that's the basis of what I spent a couple of months investigating. And I'd like to say that we know the answer. We don't really know the answer yet, but along the way there was a lot of sort of complications that can make you feel that maybe things won't turn out in Wikipedia's favor if they keep going in the direction they're going.
How does Wikipedia actually work, and what do we lose if Wikipedia in effect disappears and all of that data, all of that information that's been collected over decades gets absorbed somehow into some form of artificial intelligence?
Yeah. I think originally Wikipedia was seen as a kind of upstart, an encyclopedia that was going to challenge these sort of institutions like Britannica, as you mentioned. Over time, it's had more of a kind of effect of creating a sort of infrastructure of digital knowledge. And it's, in my story, I called it a kind of factual netting that holds the digital world together in many ways. So when you ask Alexa or Google a query, a lot of that knowledge comes from Wikipedia. And if we look at Wikipedia itself, well, how does that knowledge get to Wikipedia? These are volunteer editors. If we look at the English language edition, there's about 40,000 active editors. So they make about 5 edits per month to be considered active.
Are they vetted at all?
No, anybody can contribute to Wikipedia. Anybody who wants to sign up can write or edit an article. Now, you can be overwritten or overruled, which in Wikipedia they call reverted. So there's a layer of expertise, administrators, very experienced editors who may see a new edit because they have these tools that help them identify which articles have been worked on. and they may overrule some kind of edit. Sometimes there's what they call vandalism, where somebody's poking fun or trying to actually introduce misinformation to a story. But sometimes for an article, it's just somebody with particular expertise, whether it's music or politics or history, adding their expertise to the article. They're asked to maintain a neutral point of view. They're not asked to put new knowledge in. They're asked to put anything that they add to a Wikipedia article must have a citation. So it's not opinion, obviously. It's not one person's desire to shape a certain area of knowledge in their particular direction. Ideally, it's a lot of people, humans, volunteers, contributing without pay to these articles. Sometimes they're very reliable. Sometimes they're not so reliable.
Well, when I was a student, I would go to Britannica or one of the other encyclopedias and be pretty sure that the information I was getting was reliable. What about Wikipedia? How much can I rely on what's in there?
Sure. I had a long conversation with a woman named Amy Bruckman, who's a professor at Georgia Tech, and she just wrote a book called, Should You Believe Wikipedia? And her take, and I think it's a good one and very persuasive, is that a lot of these large, long articles on Wikipedia that have thousands of contributors are really reliable. I mean, they're checked and cross-checked, there's argument, there's deliberation, there's really a kind of pursuit of consensus truth. Now, they're not as good as a book. You're not going to get a Robert Caro version of history from these kinds of articles, but what you'll get is a great detailed entry point complete with citations about something. Now, there's a lot shorter articles that are not so well cited. An error can sometimes linger for months or even years, but it's kind of a caveat emptor. There's a little bit of buyer beware. Look at the citations. Do you trust it? But I think in a general sense, we can say Wikipedia is reliable for the most part. It's probably as reliable as Britannica. There have been studies in various science magazines about the science content of Wikipedia. Now, this raises the question, okay, ChatGPT has ingested Wikipedia. Is it as reliable as Wikipedia? And the answer is absolutely not.
You have in the story a quote from some Wikipedians who say their endeavor works in practice, but not in theory. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, here's an organization that, arose in that moment of sort of internet's infancy, where we were all going to kind of collaborate and, help each other, and sort of, it was going to be what they call an open source movement, where we're all kind of working together, and in Wikipedia's case, to create new knowledge through this kind of hive mind by all kind of amenable contributions and deliberation. How do you create a kind of global organization that has 61 million articles, I think it is now, in 345 languages, and no one gets paid? It shouldn't work, and yet it does. And for some reason, there is a large core of people out there who delight in the idea of just spreading knowledge. And fundamentally, that is Wikipedia's purpose. Can we spread as much free and accurate knowledge as possible? And can we create an infrastructure of knowledge, an ecosystem, as they would call it, that will last through the century?
There must be some operating costs just to plug the thing into the wall. Who pays for that?
There are, and it's charitable donations that are given to Wikipedia for the most part. Wikipedia doesn't advertise, but it does seek donations through various times of the year. And the Wikimedia Foundation, if we can keep that straight, which oversees, it's a nonprofit that oversees Wikipedia, has tens of millions of dollars. And there are a lot of technological costs and engineering costs to actually keep this thing running. Now, there's also another side to Wikipedia where some businesses have begun giving money to Wikipedia because they use it. For instance, Google is a subscriber to a special technical hookup called an application programming interface that gives them almost instantaneous access to Wikipedia updates. And that's been useful too, because they can get a few $1 million as well. So the value Wikipedia creates on the web in some ways is recouped both by charitable donations of individuals and increasingly through corporations and companies that use it.
And how does Wikipedia as an institution look at AI and say, are we going to be overtaken by it? Can we adapt to it? What is the future of Wikipedia given the onset of AI and the pace at which it's developing?
It's a great question that has roiled the ranks of Wikipedians, and I think there are two sides to it. There's one side is how can Wikipedia use AI? Mm-hmm. How can these editors use these tools, not necessarily ChatGPT, although that's part of it, either to edit pieces that come in, to use it to scrutinize new contributions, to make their job easier, to help them. And that's one side of it. Now the other side is, what happens with the fact that Wikipedia is being used to train these new AI models that companies like OpenAI and Google and Anthropic, which is a new company, use to help their chatbots effectively kind of give knowledge to users who put in a query? And the answer is, well, a couple things. I mean, for one thing, I think it's a threat. And that's clearly the fact that some people at Wikipedia are quite worried that if you have a query, you might just go to ChatGPT rather than Wikipedia. Do you want to read a 10,000 word summary on Wikipedia of the Ukraine war? Or do you want to just go to ChatGPT and have a conversation about what it's about, even if it's inaccurate? So that's one aspect. Now, there might be a kind of technological fix for this, something called a plugin, where these AI companies and ChatGPT, if you subscribe, you can actually use a Wikipedia plugin. It sounds a little confusing to describe it, but essentially you're saying, I'm going to ask ChatGPT a question, but I'm going to ask it to use a plugin to Wikipedia if it doesn't know the answer. And that gives a kind of combinatory experience. It gives you the kind of fluency of a chatbot with the sort of currency of Wikipedia. So that's one answer, that Wikipedia may join forces, essentially, with some of these chatbots. But I don't know if it solves the problem in the long term of what happens to Wikipedia, what happens to this knowledge, what do users do in the future? We don't know.
Your article in the Times did not have footnotes. It didn't need them. I actually understood it, which I think is a great commendation for the article. But explain a couple of terms, if you can. What is a large language model?
Sure. These are essentially algorithms that are created. I mean, the most common one, the one we know best right now, are built by this company, OpenAI. ChatGPT depends upon the models built by OpenAI. So it gets a little confusing, but there's something called GPT 3.5 and a newer one called GPT 4. And these are computer systems that have ingested tremendous amounts of information from the web. It's called scraping, whereby computer engineers scrape data and information from the web, and this would include Wikipedia, this might include Google's patent database, it might include Reddit, these Q&A answers to queries, all of it, and online libraries too, all of it goes into these large language models, sometimes upwards of 1 trillion words, although the term they use are tokens, and it's ingested by these models. And it helps them eventually to learn language, to learn patterns of language. And really what these models are doing when you're asking them a question is trying to probabilistically predict the next word. And that sounds like, well, okay, how would a conversation go if you're actually doing that? But I think for anyone who's had long conversations with these chatbots, and for this article I had many, many late night conversations with chatbots, it's really uncanny how good they are at language.
What is GPT?
GPT, it's a generative transformer is the jargon within that. So we talk about AI in general as artificial intelligence, but what these models, large language models that ingest all this information, are often known as, in the chatbot form, is generative AI. They generate text. They can generate text to a query. So that's a little different than just using a kind of algorithmic artificial intelligence thing to sort of clean up your text or do something like that. And that's really what's new. They generate text in a way that's really mimics human language and conversation in an uncanny way.
But what it does is generate a sort of vernacular, a conversational answer, not necessarily facts, though.
Right. I mean, there's all sorts of issues with the reliability of these chatbots. Everybody, or not everybody, but probably a lot of people have heard of the term hallucinations, which is really lies, I guess we could say, or fictions that are generated in conversation. It could be a fake name, or it could be a completely false citation to an academic paper. It could even be an academic paper that doesn't even exist, that this computer system has created really from whole cloth. One other thing I think that's gone unremarked that I tried to get at in my story is that they can also lack nuance. So when we ask a complex question, if it's historical or political or cultural, one thing I think Wikipedia does pretty well is it can add different layers to that, because really it has thousands of people working on difficult questions, such as how did COVID-19 begin, or what is COVID-19?
And people with different points of view.
Different points of view, where it will give equal weight, or at least some weight, to contrary opinions and the like. But what you get with a chatbot is what you put into it. I think it's more like an information smoothie, where you don't really know what information went into it, and you can drink it down without really sort of knowing what's in it. And I think that lack of nuance, that simplification, it can be remedied if you are willing to have a 30-minute conversation with a chatbot and saying, well, what are your sources, and asking follow-up questions. But it's a really different experience than actually reading, whether it's a book or reading a long entry on Wikipedia.
And ordinarily, no sources, no references listed in an answer from ChatGPT.
You would generally have to either put that in your question or use that as a follow-up. So
And if you ask for the sources, will it provide them?
it will. Some will be reliable, some might not. It might not give you, say, for the Ukrainian-Russian war on Wikipedia, I think there's something like 409 footnotes. You won't get 409 footnotes from ChatGPT.
And a story in the Times this week saying that the efforts to limit hate speech, to limit false information on AI are not as safe as we thought they might be.
Yeah, there's a new story out today that sort of looks at how some Carnegie Mellon professors have found really serious chinks in the armor, I think, of some of these safety systems, or what they call guardrails, that were put up and around these AI systems, whereby you can get them, if you can introduce certain types of code to them, to do things that they shouldn't be doing, such as how do you build an explosive, or, for instance, unleashing some kind of defamatory or racist language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you said you started out sort of neutral about AI. Where are you now?
I think I was far more impressed than I expected to be with their language capabilities, with the ability to engage the user in a way that was really uncanny. And again, I would have these long conversations. Are you better than Wikipedia? Why are you not better than Wikipedia? And then it would make a mistake, and I said to the chatbot, do you feel bad about the mistake you made? And it said, not really. I'm just a machine. I don't really have feelings. But it was really extraordinary to have this kind of interaction. Now, at the same time, it wasn't rigorous. It wasn't detailed. And as a journalist, as an author, I thrive on detail and depth. And it wasn't that. It felt like skimming over the surface of waves. At the end, I wondered, very much like probably anyone else, what the future holds. Can these companies make these AI systems more reliable? And we'll have to see. And we could talk about what challenges they face, because I think there are very, very significant challenges. And the other thing is how do we kind of, in the future, how does our ecosystem of information work? Do we just have an array of choices whereby we use ChatGPT, we use Wikipedia, we use TikTok for the younger generation, and we learn, or most of us at least learn, to kind of understand the pluses and minuses of these different systems, and we have a kind of buyer beware mentality? I don't know, if that's the future, it could be. What I do know is that there are people who are going to find disinformation unsuspectedly, and I think that's a big danger, and I don't think we're near to solving that.
A lot of people have an apocalyptic view of where AI can go, taking over things, starting wars. Do you?
Sometimes. I think my story, there is this kind of question of existential risk for AI, and it's a real one. And the, I think, cartoon version, which might not turn out to be a cartoon version at all, is that we plug one of these systems in the future into the web and it tries to solve a problem by doing something very damaging to humanity. And they call this the alignment problem, that what if we create an AI machine that is not in alignment with human ideals and human values and human, morals. And it's very possible that'll happen. But I think there's also a range of other dangers too. Certainly there's the employment question. And that might not be an existential risk, although it might be for some people. If
in
AI,
terms of taking over jobs that humans now perform?
Exactly. So taking over jobs, whether it's legal jobs for legal assistants or people,
or journalist jobs.
Or journalist jobs. And that's a very real worry as well. So,
well, is that a worry, or is that arguably a good thing in terms of freeing people up to do something else?
I think it could be. I think we have to wonder, is the net value created by these machines, does it benefit all of us, or does it benefit the people who have been displaced by them? Mm-hmm. Or are we at a place where these kinds of public investments and public goods, and we can use Wikipedia as an example of that, people generating their time because they believe in spreading good knowledge, are used by companies to build models, and the profits for those are really privatized. And I think it's a version sometimes of how government funding that is funded by taxpayers goes to create new ideas or technologies that are then adopted by, for instance, technology companies that in turn make a lot of money. And I think it is too early to tell. And I think it's too early to tell too, because I don't think that AI, or at least these large language models that we've seen really come into being in the last 18 months, I don't think they will necessarily have the same kind of glide path that they've had for the past year and a half. I think the future for them is fraught with all sorts of legal difficulties. There's renewed regulatory scrutiny in Europe and in the United States. There's, I think, challenges of economics if they can't be reliable. For instance, if medical professionals want to use them, or if businesses want to use them and they prove to be faulty, are they really valuable in that sense?
But they could go renegade, couldn't they?
They could go renegade, and there's that too. So there's that hurdle as well. And I think there's just technological issues that are a lot harder to solve than it might seem at this point. They've come a long, long way to being very useful to anybody who wants to go online and try them. But I think right now what we're seeing is that they, for instance, with this Carnegie Mellon study, where they might be breakable, you might be able to get past their guardrails and their safety measures to do something bad. That's one aspect. Another is a study that that I talk about in my story, that it seems to be the case that you can't train an AI model on knowledge that was also generated by an AI model. So, it's kind of
you still need Wikipedia.
You still need human beings to generate knowledge, to generate insights that can be used to train these models. Otherwise, you get something called model collapse, where they start talking in circles like a madman.
In the words of the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard, the sad thing about artificial intelligence is that it lacks artifice and therefore intelligence. Thanks to New York Times Magazine's Jon Gertner for helping us unpack something of truly great importance. Coming up next, I'll share some personal thoughts on New York versus the suburbs. New Jersey's gripe with New York didn't start with congestion pricing. The Garden State's grousing began back in the 17th century, when King Charles II of England granted what was formerly New Netherland to his brother James, Duke of York. What became New Jersey was lumped together with New York. Then the Duke gave Jersey away to settle a debt. New Jersey didn't become a separate royal colony, though, until 1702. And even after that, until 1738, it was ruled by the governor of New York. Because of ambiguities in the original land grants, violent border skirmishes between the two provinces, later states, persisted for half a century until after the Civil War. The original maps ambiguously defined the dividing line in the Hudson River, which led to New Jersey's claim over Ellis Island. That legal challenge was waged all the way to the Supreme Court. It ruled largely in Jersey's favor in 1998, a Pyrrhic victory anyway, since the island is owned by the federal government. Early in the 20th century, the two states founded a landmark regional compact, the Port Authority. But that didn't stop them from feuding over bridge and tunnel tolls, investment in airports, building a World Trade Center, and the shift to containerized cargo, which doomed the New York piers to New Jersey's advantage. New York City has historically been the engine of the region's economy. It's also been identified with congestion, poverty, inefficient services, high crime rates, and even higher taxes, and now with an influx of migrants, all of which have prompted suburbanites who fled the city in the first place to think negatively of it. But there are no longer just urban challenges. They know no boundaries. Despite all the grandstanding, New York's suburbs still depend upon the city for survival. And walls don't work. They didn't work 400 years ago to keep the Indians out. They won't work now to keep New Yorkers in. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.